Today, I want to show you the hidden paradox of Splatoon's wider balance history that's been slowly building in the background, and why exactly the devs are really struggling to escape it. Since this is a loop, we'll begin our story at the current endpoint, the endgame meta of Splatoon 3. There's a lot I could say about it, but I just want to look at the overall broad trend of what style is doing best, and that's leaning to heavy fighting power. Specifically though, it's main weapons that all have the ability to kill you quickly or consistently. Think of big hitbox weapons like Range and S-Blast, or Decavitator. These can all also one-shot you. If they're not able to instantly kill you, then they better get pretty close. Bucket does 70 damage in one hit. Pencil does 68. Stamper has like 3 ways of doing 70. Wow, look at all the AoE and large damage numbers we have. Why not pair all of these with some big hitbox weapons or options to cover kills quickly, such as burst bombs for instance, to convert all the high damage into instant death. That is what all the best comms for the past year or so have tended to build around. Exploit fast, consistent kill times and combos with other teammates to the point where there's so many ways in top level matches to blow up instantly if you make a mistake. While much less of an issue than previous meta problems, this is still a clear dominant strategy, and the game can be improved by having other strategies be better, which the devs have attempted to solve in the most straightforward way. Just nerf all the main weapons that cause that, and this is a solution that anyone familiar with my channel will know I disagree with. But let me put aside my personal opinion for a second and just look at the data. What I think is incredibly interesting and not often talked about is every single time we've seen these kind of nerfs, which consistently target all the weapons mentioned above, the problem actually just keeps getting worse, which might seem kind of backwards, but I think it's easiest to see what's going on here by looking at the 2 weapons that aren't the main fighters. The slots normally filled by Pencil and Support. Every single time Pencil has gotten nerfed in its paint power and points for special, as well as further optimizations to the game, good pencils play more into their damage and fighting styles. Look at any tournament over a year ago versus now, and the playstyle of the weapon has just fundamentally shifted. That's the smaller part though. Let's go back to before 9.0. The best support in the game is Neo Splash, a weapon that almost never fights, pretty much exclusively paints, and doesn't have a super special that focuses on damage combos whatsoever. In other words, it doesn't contribute at all to the problem we talked about. After Range Blaster and Squeezer, the main midlines at the time, got nerfed though, the support we've seen trend since then has been Splash, which has Burst Bomb and Crab, scaling more aggressive than Neo Splash, with multiple ways to work off of the fast kill times. Now we have 10.0, where Crab got toned back and more counters were added to it, as well as, again, more nerfs to these fighting weapons. What's the winning support slot weapon now? Generally, we've seen success from slotting in something like dualies, such as winning Area Cup 36, or Splattershot Pro winning in Super Jump, and also being second place in that same Area Cup. These weapons barely even fit the support role, and fight way more than the previous ones did. And I think you can see where I'm going with this. As main weapon power trends down, support and anchor have become more fighting focused to compensate. And so because of that, more weapons are focused on high damage numbers or combo tools for instant kills in the same comp than we had before, meaning there is now a higher likelihood of your fighting resulting in dying to the fast kills. It's so powerful that it's totally worth the lower pain and special output if it means being able to simply outpace the other team in fighting power. We now have more weapons contributing to this problem than we did before. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because it doesn't change the fact that this overall strategy is what's good. So of course, people are going to do anything they can to stick with it. And if anything, you're just incentivized more now to really make sure you have that power, where it was much easier to have that level of fighting power with fewer weapons prior. But okay, if nerfing these weapons doesn't work, what is supposed to deal with this playstyle? Well, in terms of main weapons, there are 2 main options that are supposed to help deal with this, which is mobility and shielding. Both of these are pretty obvious. They just provide tools that slow down these fast kill times. If you're familiar with Moonlight's 96 tent mid comp, you could see this in action in pretty much any of their tournament sets. Having to deal with Splash Wall, Tent Shield, and the threat of a sharking mint Decavitator forces the other team to slow down and be more cautious, and it forces longer fights. And that's where these fast kill weapons can show more of their problems. Mainly that they're all really ink hungry, they're generally pretty slow, and they especially don't want dragged out fights because they tend to rely on powerful sub-weapon combos. Those get negated if you have to waste them trying to shred walls, and it makes the weapons easier targets. Mobility functions in largely the same way. Instead of directly tanking, you just have a higher chance to avoid damage and stall out the fight that way, as well as being able to take more split up angles, making it harder for you to get 2v1'd and comboed to death. So if I'm saying that all of these types of weapons are strong into the meta, why are they so rare? And it's here that I want to pause and jump backwards backwards to Splatoon 2. If you know the meta history well, Splatoon 2's endgame meta has about the exact opposite problem of Splatoon 3's. Rather than it being too easy to die, nothing would die in this game. Support and the ability to survive in general was blatantly overtuned in Splatoon 2, so the best options were things that could take advantage of that to stay alive longer. You might think of the quad shooter meta for this, but before that happened, some of the best weapons were things like dualies, ink brush, or brellas. Wait a second, what do these weapons specialize in? Mobility and shielding. We just talked about that. Splatoon 2's metagame made these archetypes of weapons really broken. There were indirect things in the game that really shifted it, such as global range specials and, most importantly, ink armor. Think about trying to maximize your survivability with this added armor. If you play a weapon with higher mobility, it's harder for opponents to land the damage to break it in the first place. That made these weapons, which had their own survivability tools to combine with armor, get exponentially more value out of it. And like with Splatoon 3, the devs had the same solution, except even harsher. Tone back the main weapon power of pretty much all of these weapons, which, as you might know, didn't fix the problem here either. Once again, what happened here is the same story we just talked about with Splatoon 3. Because our best survivability tools were toned back, the comp as a whole had to shift into more and more weapons leaning into that role to compensate. Hence, quad shooter. 4 weapons that could play for their specials, stay alive, and stall out the game. And shooters were still fairly mobile. They could make up for their fighting power by their special output, and the paint allowed them to play to the same strength of being difficult to kill. I can't stress enough that this is the same strategy, just in a far less interesting and interactive way. The weapons that had higher skill expression and more unique plays were simply no longer worth it over a very easy strategy here. Meanwhile, the tools for more fighting-based weapons, things that were made to counter that by threatening the ability to kill you, just couldn't do their job enough. Think about how the same indirect tools hit these weapons so much harder. One-shot weapons like blasters, rollers, and chargers had a much harder time breaking armor or finding faster kills, and most of these got no help from meaningful buffs either, so they weren't powerful enough to deal with these options by the end. It's the exact same story, just on the opposite side, which means when we cycle back to Splatoon 3, this is why these weapons don't serve as real counters. They already got nerfed before, and when the game shifted to a special lineup that didn't favor these types of weapons, it hurt them even more, putting them in a balance spot where they're not quite at the power level to compete with the meta options. You could even take this story and go further back. These same fighting-based combo weapons that were needed in Splatoon 2 were actually pretty good at the end of Splatoon 1, and look what happened to them before the next game came out. Every single time, the solution of nerfing all these top-tier weapons that are central to the meta of the game just never works. Beyond not working, it actively damages the ability to balance the next game and requires a course correction, and there's evidence that this harsh balance isn't needed. Shooters didn't get over-nerfed going into Splatoon 3 and just had their special output toned back, and guess what? They ended up being balanced just fine in this game. Is there a way out? Well, yes, and let me tell you all the good news here. As similar as the stories are between the previous Splatoon games and this one, Splatoon 3 does have a big advantage. The special design of the game is a lot better. It doesn't invalidate most of the weapon classes. The main core problem with Splatoon 3 is the map design, which, yes, it does play an important factor. Mobility and shielding weapons will generally want wider angles, which gives them more chances for one-on-one fights and a higher likelihood of being able to drag out engagements. However, it's a lot easier to work around this than something like ink armor, where you cannot fundamentally change its ability to tank a shot. The maps can get better and have gotten better. And even if the maps don't change, this can be adjusted by messing with the other stats, such as the mobility and shield ones. This was already done on ink brush, for example. To break out of this balance loop, we have to correct the mistakes of it, and that's fixing what we've over-nerfed before. Right now, these are our mobility and shielding weapons. Even while weaker, there's clear signs these weapons have a noticeable impact on the meta. Again, look at Moonlight's comp in the Western scene. When our teams are going against them, the way they end up beating them is having to change their comp to have less instant killing options to have more ways of dealing with the shielding, mitigating this problem. And while there's less recent examples I can point to in Japan of this style doing well, Gluga did win a recent area cup. That's a weapon that plays around dodge roll mobility and wall and booyah for shielding and tanking, literally being an amalgamation of the tools that counter the meta. So of course, in the right hands with the right team comp, it can win. There's plenty of ways to go about fixing this problem. Weapons you could change would be things like over-nerf dualies such as Tetra and Dualie Squelcher, increasing the fighting power of more mobile weapons like Wiper, Reflux, or Ink Brush, but most importantly is unfortunately the one that's doing the worst right right now, which is Brellas. Why are Brellas most important here? Because they pair well with both of these things. Too many mobile weapons can stack on weaknesses. Too many wall weapons can reduce poking power and, most importantly, forward mobility. However, Brellas pair perfectly with either style. Their shotgun blast can provide high damage to make up for weaker ones like Inkbrush or Dually Squelcher, while they tank to allow them to close the gap with their dodge rolls. Splash walls are tanky, but can struggle to push the line forward, while Tense Shield can actually help you move in. Now, to conclude here, despite my comparisons, I do want to give the important disclaimer that Splatoon 3 is in a far better spot than 2. The problems are fixable, and of course, having a diverse and fighting-focused meta is much better than the shooter-spammy stally one we had before. But that's right now. Splatoon 2 did have a more set of interesting weapons built around its core strategy, and it only became much worse as those got over-nerfed. While Splatoon 3 is more careful with its nerfs, it's currently heading in the same direction. It's just harder to notice because it's moving slower. But I do still think that this is a problem worth critiquing, especially long-term. To me, if we don't learn from the trends of our most recent patches or the series' broader history, it will be repeated. And I don't want to see what Splatoon 3's meta could become if we continue down the balance path we're doing right now. So I really hope we see a new approach soon. Thanks for watching.